Good morning, afternoon, and evening, and welcome to the third installment of the new CIES webinar series. Let's connect and think together. We created this series to provide the space and time to bring together a panel of experts from across the world to discuss current issues from a global perspective. The goal each week is not to forecast the future of sport or to find a panacea to the problems that we're facing in this current global crisis. Instead, our objective is to have an engaging discussion between the CIS global family and you, interested individuals, probably experts in your own right in your own areas. So a brief reminder about the format. This is a public debate, and we welcome your questions either in the chat on the sidebar, in Facebook, or on the YouTube channel. We will do our best to field them all. As a reminder, the webinars are all recorded. And if you're interested in future webinars, then please subscribe below. So where will our educational webinar journey take us today? After exploring the situation at football clubs around the world in week 1, and last week discussing the challenges facing entrepreneurs and startups in the global sports world, this week we're going to turn our attention to the field of industrial relations, the relationships between management and labor. It is particularly timely with the recently released guidelines, both by FIFA and the BAT, the Basketball Arbitration Tribunal. And you will find links to both of those documents in the chat rooms, both on the YouTube and the Facebook page. So today, my name is Kevin Talek Marston at CIS, and I am privileged to be joined by a panel of experts from several continents. Firstly, welcome, bienvenido to Mariano Clariá, a lawyer and partner at Clariá and Trevisán in Buenos Aires, and also the director of the FIFA CIS International University Network course with UCA, the Universidad Católica. Mariano teaches on the FIFA diploma in football law extensively across most of Latin America. As a practitioner, Mariano, you've been involved for nearly 20 years in sports law as a legal counsel to Buenos Aires, the Superliga in the Argentinian football, and you serve on a number of committees in the federation. Our second guest today, Margarita Echeverría, bienvenida, and a special thank you because it is 5:30 a.m. in Costa Rica. Margarita is a lawyer going into her 4th year as General Secretary for the Costa Rican Football Federation, and she previously worked in the role already 20 years ago. She's also the coordinator of the FIFA CIS Executive Program in Sports Management, organized in cooperation with the Universidad de Costa Rica. She's a current member of the FIFA Ethics Commission and the CONCACAF disciplinary committees. And in the last 13 years, she served as an arbitrator for dozens of cases at the Court of Arbitration for Sport. Welcome as well to Alexander Engelhard, who is a graduate of the 2013 edition of the FIFA Master, and he's now attorney at law at Arnecke, Sibeth, and Dabelstein in Germany. Alexander's been working in the area of dispute resolution, international arbitration, doing proceedings before CAS, the BAT, which we'll discuss, obviously, and before UEFA and FIFA judicial bodies. More recently, he's been working on setting up and advising the EuroLeague Players Association, something that we will discuss a little bit later. And our last guest today, but not least, is Roy Levy, partner at Probst, Partner AG in Zurich, and an alumnus of the 2011 edition of the FIFA Master. Roy specializes in litigation and arbitration relating to sports law, specifically in disciplinary and ethical cases. Roy, you've been regularly representing clubs, federations, players, and coaches before judicial bodies, again at FIFA, CAS, and the Court of Arbitration for Sport. And recently, you were named by Who's Who Legal in their prestigious list of leading sports law experts. So I'm very grateful to the 4 of you. Thank you for joining us today. And I would like to just begin by asking each one of you, maybe beginning with Mariano, to give us a brief overview of the situation in your country with related to the sporting context, the calendar, the labor issues, and just introduce us to the topic from your perspective. Thank you, Mariano.
Thank you, Kevin. Good morning to everyone. Thank you for this kind introduction, and well, also thanks to the CIES for the organization of this fantastic webinar, and also for inviting me to be part of it with this group of experts in the field of sports law. Well, as you said, I'm going to give a quick overview of the current situation in Argentina regarding this pandemic, this coronavirus pandemic, not only in football, but in general for the rest of the society, to set the grounds for the discussion. I will begin with some information about the organization of the football competitions in Argentina, mainly focused on the first division championship. First of all, this season, the top football division is composed by 24 teams. Second, the season of professional football runs from July 1st to June 30, the same as in Europe. And this year, there were two competitions supposed to be played. One, the league, which is called the Superliga in Argentina, which is a top football league competition, and then the Copa de la Superliga. The Superliga Argentina has already been played and concluded on the 8th of March, when Boca Juniors won the championship, and 1 week later, the so-called Copa de la Superliga started. This Copa de la Superliga, however, has a particularity because the results, this is only for this year, but the results of the group stage were to be counted to decide together with the results of the Superliga already concluded, both the qualification to the international competitions organized by CONMEBOL, Copa Libertadores and Sudamericana, but also the relegation of 3 teams to the second division. A few days later, the Copa de Superliga started on March 17th. After only 1 game was played, the ball stopped rolling since all football activities have been cancelled in the country. 2 days later after that, on March 19th, a preventive and mandatory lockdown order was put in place by the government and is still in place. So under this scenario, obviously, football activities are still suspended, no training sessions, not everything at all. And we don't know for how long this will keep in the same way. At the same time, in the last weeks, a lot of rumors have appeared about the future of the competitions. Nothing is still official. For example, there's an idea of going back to a league of 30 teams, shifting also to an annual calendar beginning in 2021 to adapt our calendar to the continental agenda. A few years ago, the Copa Libertadores that was used to be played during the first semester became annual, so it was a big change for us. There is also an idea of suspending relegations, not only for this year, but probably for a couple of years to give clubs the chance to recover from this situation. Also, the financial fair play implemented a few years ago by the league will probably be suspended or cancelled. In fact, so far it has been de facto suspended. Obviously, this scenario has caused severe financial damages to the clubs, although it is true that TV companies are still paying, and we hope they will continue to pay, which is probably for some clubs is the most important income. For the biggest clubs, maybe not, but for some clubs it is absolutely necessary to survive. But at the same time, some sponsors are cutting or deferring payments. Obviously, fans stop paying membership dues, and of course, there is not income at all from ticketing and other sources of income from activities from the clubs that are or have been suspended at all. So debts are mounting up, and the crisis may lead football to an unprecedented crisis. Regarding the football, the players, there is a football players union, that was created in 1944, and the first CBA in force is from 1975, 45 years ago. So there is also a national law of the status of football players. This law, together with the CBA, clearly protects the player rights. Professional footballers in Argentina are employees of their club. There is no discussion about that at all. The employment contracts are fixed terms with a minimum of 1 year and a maximum of 5. And contracts are always registered before the federation until June 30. But contracts may include additional clauses clarifying the relationship between club and player. As we will probably see later on today, the wording of this term or extension clause varies substantially from one contract to other, and it will probably have an impact on what you're going to discuss today. Contracts are signed in a standard contract in a form pre-approved by the federation and the union together, but clubs usually add lots of different clauses in a different or private agreement that is also registered before the federation. So far, there is no official information about any collective negotiation with the union, but I have to say that the General Secretary of the union have publicly rejected any reduction for the players' wages. However, obviously clubs are struggling financially to pay their players, so they're individually talking with their own employees, not only with football employees, because some clubs, the amounts to be paid to employees that are not related to football are higher than the amounts related to football. This is not the case for the big clubs, but in some clubs it is a problem. And so they're trying individually to seek a reduction or a deferral of the wages and try to reach a bona fide solution, what seems to be FIFA's intention in order to maintain contractual stability. So nothing is official right now, and in particular regarding the competitions, we don't know when the competitions are going to be resumed. We have no idea if the Copa de Superliga is going to be played or not. We do not know when the competitions of this season are going to end, when the public will be able to attend the matches, and if we are going to have relegations or promotions this year or in the near future. So as you can see, everything is uncertain right now, as it may probably be also in other countries.
Uncertainty is difficult, Mariano. It's and I know the situation is also quite similar in Costa Rica. Margarita, you're in the federation at the moment, obviously, and I know the league is organized by a separate body which runs the league. Can you give us a brief overview of the situation in Costa Rica with respect to the calendar? I understand you have still a few matches to play. What is the situation with the clubs and players there?
Okay, yes. Well, in Costa Rica, we have 2 professional leagues. UNAFUT that has 12 clubs and LIASE that has 18 clubs. Right now, every tournament are canceled. Our health authorities, they strongly recommend that be canceled, so everything is canceled. I think that since a month and a half. It is important to know that each league does not receive any money from the government, as well with the federation. We don't receive any money from the government. So our incomes are from sponsors, TV rights, as Mariano said as well in Argentina, banners in stadiums, ticketing contributions from fans. Since we have the pandemic here, I have to recognize, and it is important to say that because we are very proud about our government, because they took very important decisions since the beginning. And since the beginning, every school, high school, university were closed, as well government entities and private companies start to work from home. We have a lot of restrictions, so our statistics, I think that are not bad. We have 669 positive cases, only 6 deaths, 150 recovered, and have been tested 11,300 people. I think that because all the government has done, we have these results. So for Costa Rican people, it's been very important to stay at home and to follow all the instructions that the health authorities said. So, for example, all the entertainment and all the sport activities are canceled, and we don't know when are we going to start. As you say, in our first league, we have around to continue in the tournament, and we don't know when are we going to start again. But when the tournament was canceled, was very important because all the clubs and the association players that we have, that is very is strong and is very respected for all the parties, the clubs, they agree and they reach an agreement very soon. And you know, here in Costa Rica, we have minimum salaries for football players. In first league is $1,000, and in second league is like $600. And all of them, they reach an agreement, and the agreement is that they're going to respect the minimums, and up to the minimums, they are going to receive half of the salary. So, for example, if you have a player that the salary is $4,000, they are going to receive, or they are receiving right now, $2,500. Well, here in colones, but it's the, you know, approximately in dollars. So right now, and for the moment, clubs and players are quiet and waiting what is going to happen. As well, they agree that if we continue the championship, if we are going to play with closed doors, they are going to receive 60% of the salary. And if are going to be in open doors, 75% of the salary. All the players are okay with that. Of course, the clubs. Right now, as Mariano says here, TV rights are very important. So they are the first income and the most important income that have clubs. And they are trying, you know, to keep all the clubs in this situation. So right now, this is what is going to happen. And we know that CONCACAF, and they send us that it's supposed that for 28 June, we have to have all the tournaments finished, because they need to have the dates in order to be what are they going to do with the CONCACAF tournament, the league. So we have a date, 28 June, but not for sure. Really, we don't know what is going to happen here. For now, we know that in April, we're not going to have any sport working. So as Mariano says, we don't know, really. We are waiting.
It's an uncomfortable and uncertain situation, obviously, across all of Latin America, but also in Europe. Roy, could you give us a brief overview of the situation in Switzerland, and maybe also take us to the global level? I know you've recently written a little piece that explains the FIFA COVID recommendations and guidelines that have come out. So maybe you could take us a little bit higher up from a global perspective as well.
Sure, Kevin. Thanks. I'm happy to do that. Well, in Switzerland, we are in a lockdown since 16th of March, really. Lockdown means shops are closed. People are not allowed to gather in groups more than 5 people. So we are allowed to go out still for walks in small groups, but other than that, basically the whole economy is totally shut down. Also, of course, sports, professional sports especially, has stopped. No more matches are being played, no more trainings. In Switzerland, 23 matches have been played of the league, so 13 are remaining to be played. The situation right now is that no one really knows what's going to happen regarding the economy. The economy is going to restart a little bit, stage by stage, as of next week. A few shops will be allowed to open, and then on the 11th of May, the schools will reopen, and so on and so forth. But regarding football specifically, or sports, no one really knows what's going to happen and when matches can be
played, even behind closed doors. You know, it's not, no one really knows. Now, what you mentioned before, yes, I would like to give a brief introduction into the FIFA COVID-19 guidelines. So FIFA issued this guideline on 7th of April. It is basically FIFA said it's obviously due to the COVID-19 football activities have all been suspended, and in almost the entire world, and they have received many requests from clubs and players and leagues what they should do. So FIFA said it has a responsibility to mitigate the consequences and also to ensure a harmonized response. Players should not be treated drastically differently across the globe for the same kind of issues. So first of all, FIFA, which is interesting, FIFA stated that this is a case of force majeure. This is interesting because force majeure has never, to my knowledge, never been accepted by the FIFA DRC or the FIFA PSC in all the cases that have been brought before them. Not even in crises like in 2014 when the tsunami broke out and other natural disasters like that. It has never been accepted that it's a case of force majeure. Now FIFA just stated it is a force majeure, and therefore the FIFA Council gave a mandate to basically establish a working group, which then came up with these guidelines. Now this is interesting, this working group, because what FIFA did is it basically did a consultation process with the relevant stakeholders. So it asked, or it involved the relevant stakeholders like the confederations, the member associations, the European Club Association, FIFPro, so the World Union of Players, and the World Leagues Forum. Which I would imagine is probably quite a difficult task to do, to get all these different stakeholders at the table, or in this case at the video conference, and discuss these issues and decide on them and come up with such a guideline that FIFA did in quite a short time. Actually, it took them 3 weeks to decide on all the different issues and then draft these guidelines. Now, the content of this guideline. First of all, what is important to understand is this guideline is non-binding. So it's merely a proposal of FIFA how clubs and players, etc., should handle the situation. But of course, they cannot interfere with national laws. They cannot interfere with agreements that have already been signed. Now, the content of this guideline is threefold. It's actually three core milestones, I would say, core principles. The first one is it's about it handles expiring agreements. So agreements which are supposed to end at the end of the current season, and also new agreements, so meaning agreements which have already been signed and are due to commence at the start of the next season. This is the first part of the content. The second part is agreements that cannot be performed as anticipated. So basically, we're talking about employment agreements between clubs and players. And the third principle is then about appropriate timing for transfer windows. Now, regarding just briefly regarding point one, basically FIFA says that there should be a priority on completing the current season. The current competition should be completed if possible. So if let's say the competition is extended until June or July or maybe even August, so shall the employment agreements and also be extended. And the same applies to new agreements. When new agreements are about to enter into force, they shall also be extended if the new season starts at a later stage. In case of overlapping seasons, priority shall be given to the former club to complete the season. And now, more importantly, because our webinar here concerns employment-related issues, more important is maybe the point 2 of the guideline, which concerns agreements that cannot be performed as anticipated between clubs and players. And there, FIFA introduced the 4 steps approach, which is quite interesting. The first step is clubs and players should try, or they're encouraged to try to find a settlement. Now, this is of course a good idea. However, it's always difficult, always problematic in employment relationships to agree with an employee with an employer on something that changes the contract, because such an agreement has to be voluntary and entirely voluntary. Now, then the step 2, and that is what was for me surprising and interesting as a lawyer. We are used to agreements that have been mutually agreed. They can only be changed by mutual agreement. Now, FIFA here introduced a way for the club to unilaterally change the employment agreement. And the first reason they can do that is if a national law or a collective bargaining agreement basically foresees such a unilateral change of the agreement. Step 3 then is that FIFA, and this is probably the most interesting point here, that if there is no such a national law or there is no such a collective bargaining agreement that allows for unilateral change, then the club may still do so if the change is done in good faith, if it is reasonable and proportionate. And FIFA then also gives a bit of a guidance what could be assessed as being reasonable. It says, first of all, the judicial bodies of FIFA would look at whether the club attempted to reach a settlement agreement first with the player.
So Roy, just to make a link with Margarita here, when you say that there would be a condition if the clubs tried to make an agreement, Margarita, you mentioned earlier that in the case of the Costa Rican clubs, there has been an agreement reached, even though you don't necessarily have a collective bargaining agreement. I just thought I would interject, Margarita, maybe you can pick up on the situation in Costa Rica from this perspective, just to answer that.
Yes, we don't have collective contracts, collective bargaining agreements with the players, but there was no problem at all, believe me, and very soon clubs and players reach an agreement. I forgot to tell you that the government delivered an executive order since the beginning as well, in which permit the employer to reduce salaries of the workers. In Costa Rica, the football players are workers. And as well, we have, as I tell you, minimum salaries for football players. So are workers, and they can touch this executive order that the government made. And they use this executive order in order to reach those agreements. And right now, as I tell you, and as explained before, the agreements were like that. And right now, nobody is talking about what is going to happen next or what is going to happen for the next contracts, because all the contracts right now are extended until the end of our tournament. So this is the situation right now.
That's very interesting, Margarita. It actually answers one of the questions that we received earlier in the chat from Matt on Facebook, which were, are the players and athletes recognized according to labor law in the national country as workers? And that is that's an interesting point. Obviously, the situation is different in different countries. Thank you, Matt, for your question earlier. Maybe that allows us to shift to the situation in Germany. Alexander, can you give us a little bit of an overview on the situation there from a labor, sports and labor employment perspective?
And thank you, CIES, for organizing this, for having me. Regarding the situation in Germany, It is very similar to what Roy has explained, and I think it's very similar to what we are all experiencing right now. The country is more or less shut down in the sense that companies, stores, public institutions, sports clubs are closed down. We don't have a shelter-in-place order or a formal lockdown order where people are not allowed to leave their houses, but they, if they leave, they're not supposed to gather in groups. Now, regarding employment, I think this is interesting for a couple of people. We have a furloughing scheme or a job retention scheme in Germany called a short-time work program, which allows employers to keep their employees during a situation that we're facing right now where a company is closed and reduce their work time accordingly for up to 100%. And if that happens, the government will step in and pay up to 67% of a person's net salaries. That allows many companies to survive right now. More than 720,000 companies in Germany are using that scheme. In fact, many sports clubs, many sports organizations are using that scheme as well, meaning that they're reducing the work time of their employers, including the work time of their players, by up to 100%. When we come to the question that Mats asked, what about players being recognized as employees under German law? I think it's very similar to other jurisdictions that employees, players in team sports, given their relationship with the club, their embeddedness into the club structure in the organization, and the right of direction of the principal with regard to that individual player, players in team sports will regularly be considered employees, while athletes in individual sports who are basically able to make their own calendar to choose who they want to work with as coaches, they are mostly considered self-employed entrepreneurs, if you want. And I would expect that this is similar, the situation in other countries. Of course, there's a discussion sometimes whether a football player, a multi-million, a millionaire would have to need the protections that labor law offers to him. But the general concept that I just explained prevails. This is true for Germany. I think it's true for Switzerland and many other countries as well.
Thank you, Alex. That obviously also raises an interesting point about the different structures in different countries and whether negotiations are done collectively or individually, something that some of you have already touched on. Mariano, I would like to know if we could come back to you. Alexander will present shortly some of his work and some of the involvement with the EuroLeague Players Association, which is building a CBA. But you mentioned at the beginning of our webinar the situation in Argentina, which has a long history of syndicated work and the presence of the Argentinian Players Association. Now, Margarita mentioned that there was an agreed reduction of salary for player contracts in Costa Rica. How has that been managed, and what do you see are the challenges and issues in Argentinian football from that perspective now?
Okay, well, as I told you before, the union has a very important role in this situation, and the General Secretary has rejected any reduction for the wages of the player. This is a first approach from him. Probably they are having conversations, but nothing official so far. What we have seen from that it was publicly announced that there is at least one team, one of the biggest ones, Boca Juniors, that has already announced that they will not make any reduction to the players, but we'll have to keep an eye on what happens if this situation continues. There is another team, for example, Racing Club is also a big club, which have publicly announced it that they have agreed with their players in a collective way, but within the club, an important reduction of the wages. We don't have any more details about this, but the announcement said important reduction of the wages. And then, well, all the other clubs are having conversations, but it has not been publicly announced anything else. So we will see what happens. I think that eventually, so far nothing is clear. We don't know if this is going to last 1, 2, or 3, or 6 or more months. So obviously the situation changes in each case. And I think eventually players and clubs are going to reach a solution. You know?
Thank you, Mariano. As you mentioned, the situation is a unique, complex situation. Roy, you mentioned earlier the aspect of force majeure. We had a question actually earlier from Brett Olaf, which was with respect to whether force majeure was accepted or not in terms of the regional and national impact. I know you briefly mentioned that, saying that from your experience in the previous cases in the FIFA disciplinary and judicial bodies, that it's never been accepted. How do you see, again, without going into potential future scenarios and forecasting what we don't know, but what are the possibilities that this might be different than previous cases where force majeure maybe was not accepted and not taken into consideration?
Well, thanks for this question, Kevin. Force majeure is many parties before the judicial bodies of FIFA or before the CAS, they try to invoke force majeure to give a reason why they could not, comply with a certain obligation they had or pay a certain amount they should have paid. And but it is very difficult to get through with that. And many have tried, many have failed. I think only in very few instances at the CAS, in very few cases, there was this in 2012, 13, the Egyptian civil war, which was accepted as a force majeure. But other than that, also the Swiss Federal Tribunal, which is the court that CAS decisions can be appealed to, has a very narrow interpretation of the term force majeure. So I think it's quite blunt of FIFA, to be honest, to state that this is a case of force majeure, and that there's no question about it. So here we have a situation where it was an unforeseeable situation, around the globe that no one has to take responsibility for. It's outside of the area of control, and therefore nobody should be punished. In a sense, that's basically what it means.
Thank you, Roy. It's interesting, obviously. I think from a comparative law perspective, I'm not a lawyer, but as far as I understand, the force majeure has a stronger role in civil law countries. And the four of you all come from civil law countries from that perspective. And we don't have anyone today from a common law country. However, in the common law countries, CBAs and collective bargaining agreements are very common in terms of negotiating professional sport labor relations. And Alex, this is where I think it links nicely to what you've been working on with the European EuroLeague Players Association, where you've helped to develop this, advising them, and as far as I understand, you're working towards a collective bargaining agreement. How do you see that as a potential tool, different in terms of negotiating situations like this, the contractual difficulties that Roy mentioned in the guidelines, expiring agreements that will be coming, the challenges that we heard from Mariano, where some clubs, River, have agreed to it, other clubs have not. But in basketball, could you give us a bit of a background on the situation with the new guidelines from the BAT?
there are two different topics at play. We can talk about potential CBA for the EuroLeague Players Association and the EuroLeague, and I'm happy to provide some input on the BAT COVID-19 guidelines that have been issued lately. Maybe starting with the CBA and your initial reference to force majeure playing a bigger role in civil law countries. I'm not sure whether this is actually the case. I've seen many American contracts or common law contracts where there are these kind of clauses in contracts. They have principles such as frustration, which are very similar to concepts that are used in civil law jurisdictions as well. Obviously, when you have a CBA in place, or when you have a situation where two social partners, a players union and a sports organizer, are negotiating with each other, it can lead to a situation which is a little bit more clear, is more helpful to create a level playing field. I think Mariano and Margarita might be able to say something about this also with regard to the situation in Argentina. And when you look at European basketball, it is correct that the EuroLeague Players Association has been working with EuroLeague towards the formation of a first CBA in that regard, which will touch on many, many more aspects than only player salaries, about working conditions, about things that are important to players, and quite frankly to the organizer of the event as well, in order to create a competition. Now, if you want, I can go into the details of the BAT COVID guidelines that have been released 2 days ago. This is, okay, we can see here on the screen. For the people at home, this is sort of the answer of international basketball to what FIFA has done with its guidelines. However, it's similar, but it's also very different. It's unique in a way that it's here the arbitral tribunal that is in place, that has delivered these guidelines on matters of substantive law, on issues such as termination of contracts, on the obligations of players and clubs, which is unprecedented from my perspective. We have seen many arbitral institutions give out procedural guidelines that are tackling COVID-19 related issues. How do I have to file my request for arbitration? Can I ask for an extension in a deadline if I cannot go to the office? All these kind of things. But here we have an arbitral institution in sport that is given certain guidelines, non-binding, but nevertheless meaningful guidelines on how to handle certain material questions of substantive law. Why can the BAT do this? Because the BAT, different from FIFA, decides ex equo et bono. What does that mean? That means they are taking into regard not a national law in a basketball dispute, but they are taking into account considerations of fairness and justice, and through that resolve basketball-related disputes. They have been doing so for the past 11 or 12 years. They have decided over 1,500 cases. This is not some new idea that has just been developed, but this is a consistent body of jurisprudence. But they're now dealing with questions regarding to COVID-19 for the first time, and have gotten together as an arbitral institution and have said, what are the main topics that are interesting to our users, meaning players, clubs, agents, coaches, that are coming to us and are seeking help. And before it comes to dispute resolution, before it comes to cases being decided by the BUT and its arbitrators, they said we have to act right now, and we have to give what the market is asking for. We have to give them guidelines on these substantive legal issues so they don't have to go to court, which is also remarkable because it might lead to less cases in front of the BUT after all, meaning less work for the arbitrators. In that sense, this is a remarkable document. I will quickly take you through some of the points, and you can interject anytime, Kevin, if you want to have a more lively discussion or cut me off here. That's fine. I can touch on this later also.
Maybe before we do that, I know Margarita had a point to make on force majeure. I don't know if that's linked to your experience as an arbitrator yourself, Margarita.
Yes, I think that we live in a civil law, and this argument, a force majeure, I think is going to be a very important resource that everybody's going to use after COVID-19. Really, this is an extraordinary situation that all of us are living, not only in football or basketball, entertainment, whatever you can imagine right now, really. So it's going to be very important, and is very easy, I think, to prove what is happening. For example, in the federation, in these days we are receiving letters from some sponsors that say that because of this force majeure, we need to adjust, for example, some payments. And, we cannot say, no, you can do it because we have a contract and you have to comply the contract. No, we have to understand that because it's a force majeure for everybody. Here in Costa Rica, some commercial stores are closed, so people cannot sell their things, and they cannot invest as well. They cannot do nothing. Right now, everybody is at home, working at home as much as you can do, but a lot of things you cannot do it, and you can understand what is industry and commercial are happening to them as well. So when we receive this kind of letters and they said, or they argue that is force majeure, what is happening, we have to accept it. We cannot dispute about that. So I think for this time, and I know that DRC and PSC and CAS sometimes, they don't accept in football regarding issues in football, they don't accept as easy when somebody argues force majeure. But I think that in this case, we are going to think about it, and it's going to be a very good argument for everybody, not only in football.
Mariano, do you feel the same way as well?
Well, it's a difficult issue, force majeure. Firstly, I think that we all agree that there is no discussion about that this is a situation of force majeure. I think everyone agrees with that, and it will be impossible to say something different. Here in Argentina, in the labor contract law, there are some provisions regarding the possibility of the employers to terminate the contract of the players, or even to suspend the contract of the players during the force majeure period, with some requirements, some technicalities, but that in a regular scenario, it would be possible. But in this case, I think that the force majeure is so big that the government in Argentina issued a decree in which they prohibited employers to terminate or suspend contracts. So this provision from the labor contract law has been de facto suspended. So I don't think that the clubs will be able to use it in this case.
Thank you, Mariano. Well, we'll take maybe the last two questions that we've seen come through together. Helena, who is also a graduate of the FIFA Master. Great to see you watching us, Helena. She's described the situation in Cyprus, which is quite complex, with the clubs proposing a salary cut for players, and there's obviously some significant tension. The Players Association is not being involved in that discussion. Helena has worked obviously with players associations in the past. So I don't know if some of you have maybe a comment on Helena's experience or her question with respect to the Cyprus situation, or equally, there was an interesting question from Juan Raskovsky on the YouTube channel with respect to training at home. Is that considered work in this current situation from a labor law perspective in the contracts that the players have signed? Working from home, are they considered performing their contracts or not? This goes back as well to Roy. What you mentioned as one of the FIFA guidelines is that the inability to perform contracts. Well, here, are the players able to perform their contracts, and therefore should they be paid their full salary? Question mark. I leave that open to you. Anyone want to take the first of the two?
I would like to take the second.
Okay,
go ahead,
I'll take the first one.
Because that example from Cyprus seemed to be very extreme. Regarding the second, and Roy, please tell me what you think about it as well. We've seen this in Germany with regarding to the furloughing scheme that I mentioned before. Clubs reducing the work time of their players on paper by 100%, but at the same time asking them to stay fit at home, use their image rights, ask them to participate in marketing activity possibly during the lockdown. Obviously, my understanding is that a player, yes, owes his performance on the pitch, and he owes to train with the team when it's possible. But once he provides all the other services, the non-sporting services, so to say, or part of them are sporting for that matter, he needs to be paid for that, and he's performing his work during that time. So it is very hard to say by a club, we're reducing your work time by 100%, when in fact they are not reducing the work time by 100%.
That's an interesting perspective, Alexander. Mariano, did you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, I agree. I think that 100% of the reduction is not possible, because you cannot request 100% of the services. So yeah, I was thinking about the question of Elena. I think that well, obviously it's a very extreme situation. I don't know anything about Cyprus national law, which will probably have to be applicable if there is no international connection. So I think that we have to distinguish between those cases involving a national player and a national club that will be decided by I don't know if they have an arbitral tribunal in the federation or in the state courts, and in that case probably Cyprus law would be applied. But if any player, even just international or even a national player, that decides to terminate the contract because of this and decides to join a club overseas, well, there we have an international connection, and that case will probably be decided under the FIFA guidelines and the FIFA law and Swiss law as well. Such an extreme situation, I don't think it would be considered reasonable even by the FIFA guidelines application.
Maybe.
Margarita? Oh, sorry, Roy. Go ahead, interject, please.
Oh, sorry. Maybe on that point, I already talked to Helena the other day about this, and basically what I told her is that, of course, if Cyprus law allows for such a thing to do of the clubs, then there's not much you can do probably about it. I doubt it that Cyprus law really allows that, and in that case, if it doesn't allow it, then what the clubs are doing is obviously illegal. Is also not according to the FIFA guideline, and are you allowed, for the player is always the question, are you allowed to terminate the contract with just cause? Do you have just cause in that case to terminate the contract? In this respect, I would be very cautious. I don't think that you have just cause right away, only if this maybe continues, although competitions are being resumed and still the club doesn't pay, only then. But right now, I don't think there's just cause. What you can always do, of course, is to invoke Article 12b of the RSTP and to try to sanction the club for overdue payables. But I would not terminate the contract.
Thank you. You heard it from Roy, the legal advice. Margarita, do you have a word as well on the answer to training at home?
Yes. For example, here in Costa Rica, as the government make that executive order, as I tell you, about the possibility of reduce the salary, is because you reduce the time that you have worked. Here we have 8 hours a day, and right now some people, a lot of people is working only 4, and you receive the half of your salary. For the players as well, as the players here, the football players, not other sports, but the football players, they are workers. So right now it's supposed that they are working half the time. And there are a lot of videos and a lot of in social medias that what are they doing with the people from the clubs, and you can understand that they are working, they are doing in the possibilities that they have right now in their homes, not watching TV. No, they are doing exercises, and they are trying to keep fit, and they have as well some in Zoom, for example, or in other technological tools with Teams, for example. They have meetings with the coach, and they saw videos, and you can say that they are doing as much as possible they can in this situation. So we can understand, for example, here in Costa Rica, we can understand, and we understand that they are working half time, but they are doing.
Thank you, Margarita. Maybe I would just ask each one of you if you had one closing word, just to give us on this topic of sport labor relations in the current situation, beginning with Mariano.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. I think that my conclusion about the relationship between FIFA's guidelines and the national law, labor law of countries, that while probably these guidelines may be inconsistent with national law of many countries, I think that in somehow this is the case in Argentina, where unilateral variation of the contract need to be mutually agreed and cannot be imposed by the clubs. But at the same time, I think that these guidelines might probably reach or achieve its main goal, and there is no doubt at all that we are living a force majeure situation, and therefore I think it would be reasonable to find a solution. And I think obviously many conflicts will arise, but I think that most of the cases are going to be resolved or agreed in a case in where the interest of both the clubs and the players are considered. I think this has been the objective of the guidelines. Some people think that the guidelines have been pro clubs or pro employer, and they have increased the risk of the players. I'm not sure about that, because when they say that national law will prevail, I think the players are protected, or at least in the case in Argentina are protected. So I think that this is the solution that FIFA wants. They want to maintain contractual stability, to respect the sporting integrity, and with that goal, they are inviting the football community to reach goodwill solutions.
Thank you, Mariano. Roy, maybe a closing word from Switzerland?
Sure, thanks, Kevin. Well, closing word from Switzerland is that I believe that us lawyers will have a lot to do in the next few months.
Well said, Roy. Well said. Margarita.
Yes, Roy, agree with you. And we are facing a very extraordinary situation, and as a difficult situation for everybody. I can understand, what FIFA pretend with the guidelines that they set or they propose to all the association members. It's a difficult situation, and every country has different laws, and every club has different situation as well. So I think that this time is going to be difficult to have standing decisions or have one thing for all the clubs and for all the countries. I think it's not going to be possible this time. So we have to deal with that. Lawyers, we are going to have a lot of work. It's just very nice, Roy, I think. But I think that we have to try to reach agreements and to try not to be biggest that this situation have been for everybody, because we have death. We have many families with sadness because the situation that they are living. Don't know if you know what is happening, for example, in Ecuador and in other countries, that you can see dead people in the houses, and they can, it's complicated. So let's as lawyers, if we can help to resolve disputes in a very good way, will be very nice. And this is my wish. And to say to all the lawyers in all the countries to try to help in this sad situation.
That's a word of hope and pura vida from Costa Rica.
Yes.
Alex, maybe a final word from Germany.
Yeah, I would agree with the last sentiments of Margarita. And I will tell to the people outside, I think what becomes clear when you look at the FIFA document, when you look at the BUT document, people are asked to negotiate, to find individual solutions to the problems, contractual issues that they have. If you cannot agree on something with your contractual partner, try to get the help of a third person, of a mediator who can help, and only then go and seek dispute resolution through one of the judicial bodies or an arbitral institution. I think what I wanted to say, because we haven't touched on it anymore now, is the content of the BUT COVID-19 guidelines. I had promised that on social media, so to say, that we would be looking into that today as well. Now we haven't done that. If you want to know more, please reach out to us, to me individually, and we can tackle your questions. And apart from that, thank you to you, Kevin. Thank you to all the other panelists. Thank you to CIES for putting this up, for giving us the opportunity to share some ideas. And I hope all of you stay safe and sound, and I'll see you around.
Thank you very much to the four of you, Mariano, Margarita, Roy, and Alexander, for joining us today on as far as Costa Rica and as early as 5:30 in the morning. I just wanted to say a big thank you to the four of you. We wish you all the best in this difficult situation, and I'd like to invite as well everyone, if you have not subscribed to the webinar service, you can do that below. Next week, we will be focusing on a specific region. It will be about the impacts of the crisis on African sports. So we'll be back next week, same time, same place. And we really appreciate your viewing, and we hope that all is well all around the world. And remember that we are here to connect and think together. So thank you and see you next week.